every now and again, we come right out of the gate here on this channel with a hand of poker. And generally speaking, when I do that, well, that means it's because it's a memorable hand of poker. Happened on a very loose table at Peppermill Reno, and under the gun limps in and the cutoff calls. Both very loose passive players. The big blind completes, and I'm in the button with the straddle on with pocket fours, and I check. With 40 in, the flop comes deuce 3-4 with a couple of spades. Under the gun checks, cutoff bets 35, and I decide to raise it to 80 with my top set. Big blind folds, and under the gun, who just limped in pre-flop, check calls here. The cutoff, now that there's two players in, he's going to be completing with a lot of hands, so he does, and with 280 in, the turn is another deuce, giving me top boat. It gets checked to me, and with the assumption that my opponents were either drawing dead or had only two outs, I decide to bet just 100 here, hoping they'll both continue on, and sure enough, both of them do. So with 580 in, the river is the king of spades, bringing in that front door draw. Under the gun thinks about it for a while before checking. The cutoff, with about 500 left, announces a $100 bet. Now it's back to me, and I ultimately decide on a sizing here of $375, hoping that both these guys have flushes and they'll both pay off. To my amazement, the under the gun limper announces that he will be 3-betting this river for all of his chips. The cutoff then snap calls that all in. So can I really fold fours full of deuces here for my remaining $600? That seems about the most insane thing I've ever said on this vlog. But the fact of the matter is, it felt like something was very wrong here. You just don't see these kind of all-in 3-bet jams on the river plus snap calls too often, especially by guys who are more calling station-y than guys who are known to ever run a bluff. But that said, this just seems like the most ridiculous fold in the history of poker if I were to make it, so I stick in all of my remaining chips, and under the gun shows pocket kings for a rivered boat. He didn't raise it pre-flop, didn't raise on the flop. Basically what happened was, pre-flop, it was a trap. On the flop, it was kind of a trap. On the turn, he was scared out of his mind, and on the river, he binked. So, a hand that I did not possibly think I can lose results in me getting completely felted. And that's how this vlog gets started.
Looking for change, looking for pain, pulling a mob, pushing a train. I'll never stop, stick to a lane, pick up the pieces and go rearrange. A look around the Peppermill at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning may not seem like a time where you would expect there to be action in the poker room, but due to a collection of people who happen to be able to play at that time, there almost always is. Things, as you might expect, started off slowly. I kept getting dealt suited aces, and all of them in the same suit, by the way, raising them, and ultimately winning extremely small pots with those hands. The first hand that I played after that had more than $100 in it came when I raised pocket nines, getting two callers, but got an ace-high flop, and both my opponents had set ace. Then I averted disaster when I played the king 5 of diamonds in the big blind and flopped a flush draw against the most aggressive player in the game. Thankfully, that flush draw never came in, as I ended up losing to ace 6 of diamonds. Then I raised a 40 MP2 with pocket eights. The low jack snap calls, as do two others. So with 165 in, the flop is 9-7-5 rainbow, and the big blind checks to me. My hand figures to be good here a decent percentage of the time, so I decide to bet 125. The low jack snap calls this bet with the other players going out. So with 415 in, the turn is a 4. I figured this was a good spot to check and evaluate, probably planning to call most of his turn bets here. Instead, he just checks, and the river comes a 5. This absolutely should have been a bet for me here for value, but I opted to hope that I would get a bet out of him instead, but he just checks back and I win against pocket sixes. Turned out that he was looking for me to hit a set, and vice versa.
The next hand is one where I really like how I played the river despite the result not exactly being ideal. I have King 3 of clubs. I probably shouldn't have to point out that I'm in the winner's straddle, but anyway. 2 guys limp and I check my option, the big blind complete. So with 40 in, the flop is King, King, 9, 2 diamonds giving me trips with, obviously, a massive kicker. It gets checked to me, and the button, the same guy who beat me with King's full over 4's full in the first hand you saw on this vlog, I can tell really wants to bet here. So I let him, and he makes it 35. The part of this hand I didn't expect was the other 2 players both calling that $35 wager. So not wanting to get felted here with my 3 kicker, I figured the play for me was to get a safe turn card and then bet it. So I opt to just call here, and with 180 in, that card comes the 7 of clubs, which I would say qualifies. The other 2 guys check to me, and I decide to bet 85. The button says that had I checked to him, he would have bet. Now this is something you can look for in poker games, probably all across the country. Generally speaking, I would say 99% of the time, when a guy says they would have bet had you not bet, what they're really saying is, I really wanted to check that card back, but now you're not letting me. So, as you probably predicted, that guy who was claiming he was going to bet folds his hand, as does Under the Gun. But MP1 decides to stick around here and make the call. And with 370 in, the river is the 9 of spades, and he checks. It's just so likely that knowing this player as I do, that he has a missed draw here. And I know you've all been in this position. You have basically the nuts, and it's pretty clear your opponent doesn't have anything. So what's the play? It's unclear that he's the type of player who would bluff raise in the first place, but I thought it was worth a shot to try to make that happen by just betting a ridiculously small amount here. So I just fire in 25 bucks. It's a technique that has worked well for me in this spot against a number of aggressive players over the year, but it turns out this wasn't one of those kind of players, and he shows Queen Jack of diamonds before throwing it in the muck. So I win that one, but give back about 200 about a half hour later, flopping an open-ender. And it turns out that betting flop, turn, and river with 6 high might not always be the best idea. Fortunately, I wouldn't have to wait long to get it back, as I called a raise with pocket 7s the next hand, and the flop came 7 deuce deuce, which I considered slightly above average. The short stack jammed all in, so the money that I'd bluffed off had come right back to me. But then we skip right to the flop in a hand where I'm in the cutoff, and I bet $40 with ace 7 of clubs on ace 10-7 all spades. The button and big blind call me here. With 180 in, the turn is the 8 of diamonds. One of these guys is a complete unknown, and the other is likely to call me extremely wide here. So I decided to make a value bet of $125, and both of these guys call. So with 555 in, the river is the 4 of spades. I obviously got a check on that card. The button bets 215, and the big blind calls him, and he wins a $985 pot with king 6 of spades. So the river card, turns out, was the best thing that I could have asked for, outside, obviously, of filling up. This is a mid-session update. Bocce ball here at Peppermill. And as much as I know about sports, I must confess that I have no freaking clue how to play bocce ball. This is the end of the update. I mentioned earlier that Wednesdays tend to be good at Peppermill. I'm convinced now that Wednesdays are the new Saturdays, as there were 2 full 5-10 games by 2:30 and both were good. We get 2 limps and the cutoff makes it 50. I look down at a couple of blackjacks in the big blind and make it 130, which drives the limpers out. Cutoff thinks about it for a minute though and makes the call. So with 280 in, the flop is ace 8-5 with a couple of spades. I'm first to act here. It's obviously not an ideal flop, and it's against a tough opponent, but my hand is going to be ahead too often to just check, so I bet $140. He thinks about it for a second and decides to call. So with 560 in, the turn is the 10 of spades. While I'm going to have the best hand a decent amount still, I think my ability to bet and get called by worse has slightly diminished here, so I decided to just check, and he was happy to check behind. And the river comes a 3. And once again, it goes check, check. I turn my hand over, and he mucks. We then get a hand that will definitely generate some comments, which is fine with me. Under the gun straddles, and the same opponent I was just in a hand against makes it 40 from the hijack. I have ace-queen off on the button and make the call, and the straddle completes. So with 125 in, the flop is ace-king-queen rainbow. I'm certainly expecting a bet here, but one does not come. And even though it wasn't a 3-bet pot, given the board, I really figured this was a bit of a polarized check, as I like to say on this vlog. So I just bet $25, knowing this is likely a way ahead or way behind situation. If the under the gun player were to call me here, I'd feel really good about this. But if he folded, which ultimately is what happened, and the hijack were to check call, I'd be less comfortable. And that, too, is what happens. And with 175 in, the turn is the 8 of diamonds, and he checks again. I decided to stick with my plan and bet small once more, making it 40. He thinks about it for a second before doing what I was always kind of afraid he would do, and make it 125 with a check raise. It's definitely possible that he could be turning pocket nines or a hand like that into a bluff here. And if so, so be it. My instincts told me otherwise. I folded the hand, and he doesn't show, but he says...
That's going to tilt me all day, you know that?
So could I have been bluffed? Yes, but I don't think I was. I do think that he's the kind of guy that, had he been bluffing, he just wouldn't have said anything. He wouldn't have tried to go with this whole, I'm tilted that you folded that hand thing, based on what I know about him as a player. And that takes us to this hand. I am in the winner's straddle under the gun with ace-king, and we get 3 callers. I decide to raise to 75, given the fact that it's a sleeper straddle, with the straddle getting last action if no one raises in front of him. And the only one of those limpers that calls me is the player in middle position 1. The same guy that won that hand with kings full over fours full from the previous session. And with 175 in, the flop is 6-7 deuce with a couple of spades. So I don't have a pair, but I still could have the best hand a decent amount here, so I decided to go ahead and make it 100. I am aware of the fact that his calling range is quite wide here, and sure enough, he calls. So with 375 in, the turn is the 5 of spades. So I still don't have a pair, but I now have the nut flush draw, which creates kind of a conundrum for me. Is this a spot to fire a semi-bluff or not? The guy is definitely a calling station, but at some point, he has got to be capable of folding his small pair hands. So, despite the fact that I almost never try this against these kind of guys, I figured this was the perfect opportunity to fire a second barrel, and I make it 225. At first, he started talking about how much he was going to bet if I had checked here, which I certainly thought meant that a fold was coming. But after he hems and haws for a couple of minutes, he finally decides to call. And I had to find myself wondering, was this an act? Was something going on here? We know he doesn't have the nuts, but what the hell does he have? And with 825 in, I need a spade or a pair on the river to probably make the best hand, but we get the jack of diamonds. My read on this now was that he had a hand like 8s or 9s, and he had just decided that he's not folding to me. And all the power to him, if that was what he was doing, because that read would have been correct. The truth that emerged proved to be quite a bit more stunning than that. The river checks through, and he shows ace-5 offsuit for the turned pair of 5s, which ended up being the best hand. Some might fold that to a pre-flop 3-bet. Most would fold it on the flop. But that doesn't happen. And I shouldn't be mad about it. I should actually be happy about it. But after that pocket king's hand a few days ago, I can't lie, it kinda stings. Fortunately for me, When I ran out of time on the day and had to go pick up my son, I was still booking a win, but it felt like it was a much smaller win than it should have been. I am trying to not be on tilt about that last hand. And by the way, if I'm going to lose to one of the opponents in that game, that's probably the guy that I'd pick. But man, it's hard not to be on tilt when in a 3-bet pot you get a 7-6 deuce flop, still get called, and when the 5 of spades hits the turn, that's just like the absolute nuts in this particular opponent's mind, and you just completely broke out on the river. One of the more frustrating hands I've played in recent memory, and one I intend on forgetting about soon. All right, this hand is definitely the main event of this vlog in more ways than one. It comes when you get a button straddle, and the world's most dangerous man, Ken Shamrock, who's in this game, limps in middle position 2. I have King 10 of clubs in the hijack and make it 45 here. Both back around to Ken and he completes. And with 105 in, we're heads up to a flop of Ace Jack 7 with a couple of diamonds, giving me nothing but a gut shot to Broadway. Rather than check to me, he opts to lead out for $55 here, playing 2,300 effective, and having position in this hand, I opt to make the call, with 2 things in mind, one of which is obviously hitting a gut shot to the nuts, the other is the potential to make a move in this spot. So with 215 in, the turn is an interesting card. It's the 8 of hearts. So I improve to a double gut shot straight draw, and Ken bets $195 here. Now, I know him pretty well. And while he's going to have some monsters here a decent amount of the time, that's not going to be the case all that often. So I figured there was a decent chance that I'd be able to represent diamonds or hearts should they come in on the river here, and he checks to me. If they come in and he still bets, I'm probably just going to have to surrender the hand, but I think there's a decent chance that he does end up checking this river should one of those 2 flush draws come in, and obviously I could still hit my hand. There's also a small chance, given what I know about his game, that a king could make me the best hand if that comes in as well. So I make this call. And with 605 in, sure enough, the river is the 3 of diamonds, and he decides to check it over to me. Now, I'm obviously going to bluff here. The question is, how much? Knowing him as I do, he definitely isn't always going to have an ace here. That's the good news for me. But I still figured I should bet the smallest amount that I could get away with that would give him pause with a hand like ace 5 or ace 6. So I settle on a sizing of $345 here. And he goes deep into the tank. And ultimately thinks about this for longer than it took him to submit Dan Severn in UFC 6 back in 1995, and that is not a joke. What a freaking beast Ken was in the octagon. Anyway, after thinking about this for quite some time, he finally decides to lay the hand down. And if you're wondering, did I show the hand or not? What, you think I want to get my ass kicked?
Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad, never good, fill my head full of every single doubt, yeah. Please say any negative thoughts, I pop off when I hear people say I cannot. I get off to the thought of proving everyone wrong, I won't stop to the top, so you better back off and get lost. I'ma stay loud, stay proud, never running out, never heading south. I'll be spreading out, call it word of mouth, can't put me down, I'll be getting loud. You can have your doubts, not what I'm about, have your fucking cloud, it be raining now, I keep making sound, go another round, bitch I'm legend bound.